Oh, hello everybody. Thanks for watching again. It's Danny Rufo coming to you on location one more time. Today I'm in Newport, Delaware at a beautiful little memorial park. The VFW gave the town of Newport this naval artillery piece years and years ago, and they built a park around it. You see some flags behind me. We have monuments to the fallen soldiers from the Spanish-American War, the Korean War, Vietnam War, World War I, and World War II. And so I thought this would be a nice spot to come and do part 5 of our History of Delaware series. This one focusing on World War I and World War II. We'll let the chopper go by. And here we go. So let's start with World War I here on a beautiful Sunday evening in Newport, Delaware. In World War I, over 10,000 Delaware residents served in World War I. And out of those 10,000, we have a casualty list of 270. So 270 Delawareans are listed as casualties of World War I. There's a beautiful monument to them. At the University of Delaware, they have Memorial Hall. I took several English courses in that building when I was a student there. Beautiful hall, and inside Memorial Hall there's a perpetual light and the names of all those 270 fallen soldiers in bronze around. There's also a big book, and each of them has a page. Each day, the University of Delaware ROTC goes and turns a page in that book year-round. So, beautiful memorial to those fallen Delawareans. The state of Delaware contributed as well. In 1917, a naval base was built in present-day Cape Henlopen State Park, and that naval base had 800 men serving there. Their primary responsibility was mine-sweeping operations and German U-boat lookout. The German U-boats would come back and haunt the Delaware coast again in World War II. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But they had to sweep for mines. There was a great concern that the Germans would lay mines across the mouth of the Delaware Bay, disrupting trade along the Delaware Bay and River in Wilmington and Philadelphia. So they had to watch out for that. Along with that naval base, the infantry, we had a 59th Pioneer Regiment in the United States Army. This included 58 officers and 1,349 enlisted men. They served under General Blackjack Pershing in Mexico, hunting down Pancho Villa. And when World War I started, they shipped out to Europe. On August 21st, 1918, they served in the Argonne Forest. So the 59th Pioneer Regiment was a Delaware regiment in World War I. Southern Delaware, remember, very agricultural focused. And they provided a lot of foodstuffs for the United States Army. A lot of the agriculture, a lot of the fruits and vegetables were grown and canned in Delaware, and a lot of that went towards the military effort. Rationing, a lot of Delawareans rationed things during World War I. For instance, you have meatless Mondays, you have wheatless Wednesdays, and several days of the week were sweetless days. This is so meat, wheat, sugar could be rationed and could go to the Army. And so Delawareans did that as part of their patriotic duty. Also, they changed the name of some of their favorite foods during World War I because there was such an anti-German sentiment. So you have things like Frankfurters became Liberty sausage. The little hot dog, the Dachshund, that became known as the Liberty dog. The German Shepherd, my favorite breed, was renamed the Alsatian Shepherd. Instead of German Shepherd, they called them Alsatian Shepherds. German measles were called Liberty measles, and sauerkraut became Liberty cabbage. So some changes there as well. The Dupont Company has popped up in past episodes. During World War I, the Dupont Company made a large profit selling black powder munitions to the United States Army to fight World War I. In fact, they made so much money that many years later, in 1934, a book was written by a guy named H.C. Egelbrecht called The Merchants of Death, where he basically calls out the Dupont Company and others for making such large profits at the cost of so many lives. Some people even speculated that the Dupont Corporation and other corporations even pushed America towards war. There were congressional hearings called the Nye hearings, where executives from the Dupont Corporation were called to testify on Capitol Hill with their involvement in World War I and the huge profits that were made. This is also where DuPont begins to branch out. This is when they start making an early form of plastic called Bakelite, and that was used in the lenses of early World War I gas masks. We'll talk more about DuPont later on as well. So the Merchants of Death, they kind of got a black eye from that book. And again, they were making so much money that they kind of started branching out into chemicals, and of course would later become the chemical giant that DuPont becomes in the 50s and 60s. So that's a little bit on World War I, Delaware in World War I. World War II, you've got 33,000 Delawareans participating in World War II, 812 casualties. The Dravo shipyards, that's where I was in the last episodes with the cranes behind me. The Dravo shipyard was a major producer of ships for the war effort. Prior to the war, they were building between 6 and 10 ships a year, commercial use. When Pearl Harbor happened, they ramped up overtime production. And in the year 1942, for instance, they made 27 ships. Between 1942 and the end of the war, they made a total of 136 ships, mostly LSTs. These were large troop-carrying vessels. These were the ones that would come up close to the beach and the front would drop down. Men, tanks, jeeps could be unloaded on these LSTs. They also, these LSTs were used in landings in North Africa. They were used in landings in the Italian campaign on the beaches of Anzio. They were used in the Pacific and ultimately were used heavily in Normandy for the invasion of France. They also built several patrol craft, and several destroyer escorts were also built at the Dravo shipyards. So that was a major contributor to the war effort, also had become a major employer by this point. They actually had to build some neighborhoods for housing for some of these workers that were coming in. On Maryland Avenue, just past Canby Park, they had to build what was called Ship Bottom. It was a small community for those who were working in the shipbuilding industry. And also Union Park Gardens off of Union Street on the west side of Wilmington. Those were houses for the large numbers of employees working down at the riverfront in the shipbuilding industry. So Dravo was a major player for World War II. I like to talk about women here. The Women's Air Force Service Pilots, the Wasps. These were a group of women. There were well over 1,000 of them. These were women pilots from all over America. Their job, because they weren't allowed to fly combat, but we needed them to take the airplanes from the factories where they were being built and take them to coastal positions where they could be loaded on boats, etc., and taken to the European theater and the Pacific theater. So over 1,000 women pilots, they ferried these aircraft from factories to coastal bases for transport to Europe and the Pacific. They moved over 12,600 planes of 78 different types, bombers, fighters, etc. The Newcastle County Airport, which is what we call it today, was a major training facility for these women pilots. It wasn't called the Newcastle County Airport back then. It was called Delaware Army Airfield. Delaware, D-I-L-L, aware, Army Airfield. And these women didn't get a lot of recognition at that time. Later presidents gave them some recognition, most of them posthumously. Unfortunately, they had passed away. But it's very important that to cite these contributions of these women for World War II. One of the most obvious signs of World War II when you come to Delaware is if you go down to the beach. If you're from Jersey and Philly, you still call it the shore. But most of the world, we call it the beach, right? And if you go to the beach in Delaware, you're bound to see these tall towers You may have wondered what they were. They were part of the coastal defense system in southern Delaware. Present-day Cape Henlopen State Park was during World War II called Fort Miles. And Fort Miles was a system of 11 watchtowers of varying height, 50, 60, 70 feet tall, of concrete construction. These were watchtowers, and they would be used in conjunction with bunkers that were built into the dunes and covered by sand, hidden away. There were guns here, 16-inch naval guns, an assortment of smaller artillery, anti-aircraft weapons, and there were 2,200 troops stationed at Fort Miles during World War II. To build the fort, it cost $22 million. And ironically, there was never a shot fired in hostility. No ships, no U-boats were ever sunk from a gun from Fort Miles during World War II. But the threat was there. You have to understand that the German U-boats were operating along the eastern seaboard, just off the coast of the Delaware Bay. In fact, a ship called the USS Jacob Jones was one example of a ship sunk by a U-boat just a few miles away from the mouth of the Delaware Bay. So these towers were used to triangulate fire from Fort Miles onto these U-boats when spotted. But they never had to do that. But the U-boats were around. For instance, at the end of the war, May 9th, 1945, in Lewis, Delaware, U-858, a German U-boat commanded by Lieutenant Thilo Bode, surrendered to the United States Navy. And those German officers and naval crewmen were unloaded in Lewis, Delaware. So that's, it did come home. The German U-boats were around. There were also some German prisoner of war camps in southern Delaware. And these German former soldiers and sailors, they were kind of retaught, almost given like civics classes, kind of shown that, listen, life is better this way. And they worked on farms, also producing produce for the war effort. So there was a large German prisoner of war camp also in downstate Delaware. So a little bit of the contributions of Delawareans and our state in World War I and World War II. Remember, these shows are meant to wet your beak a little bit. I try to keep them short, so I can't cover everything, and there's things I kind of jump over. Any good teacher doesn't tell you everything. They kind of spark you up, and then you can kind of do what I call self-discovery. And in today's world with Google, it's easier than ever. So hopefully some of the things I said sparked your interest, and you take things a little further and check some things out. Let me know what you find. Communicate with me when you can. So this is episode 5. Episode 6, the last episode on the history of Delaware. We'll talk about life in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the boom time for Delaware in a lot of ways. We'll talk about the people coming home from the war and living their life and what Delaware was like at the end of the 20th century into the 21st century. So the next episode will be our last History of Delaware episode. I've got some Italian-specific stuff coming up. Italians in Delaware. We're going to focus on a few things. For instance, St. Anthony's, the parish of my youth and my family. We'll talk a little bit about St. Anthony's and Italians in general, why they came to Delaware, what they did when they were here. A lot of things lined up here as summer moves along. So I hope you stay with me. Remember, check us out on YouTube. Donato Rufo, Donato Rufo, one word. Tell your friends, check me out, and we'll keep putting these out there. I love hearing from everybody. Stay in touch. So let me say goodbye to you from beautiful downtown Newport, Delaware, with the gun behind me and the flags flying in the breeze. I hope you and your family have a good week coming up. Stay cool and take it easy, everybody. All right. And now, we're going to shut it off. Bye-bye.